While I do feature the historical side of wargaming on my channel from time to time, this tends to range between the Napoleonic era and World War II, but this time around I'll be venturing a little further down the timeline to show you a quick and easy way of painting your Caesarian Romans, like this one from Warlord Games' SPQR game, and I'll be using the Army Painter range of paints to do so. To start, I assembled the model from the plastic kit but kept the shield separate. As this would block quite a lot of the body, keeping this unattached for the time being would make painting the rest of the model much easier. I simply drilled and glued in a small section of wire to make holding it much easier. Once I had built it, I started off the whole painting process with some of the Army Painter's leather brown. Now you can do this in a few ways. You can prime and apply a layer of leather brown, or you can simply use the aerosol primer version of the paint instead. Either way, the intention of starting with brown was not to only help with some of the red skin tones and other warmer colours that I would be applying, but it also helped to give the model a more worn and weathered look. By having the brown still visible in some of the recesses, it creates the appearance of dust and dirt accumulated during the battle, and so helps to add a little extra realism to the miniature. After priming, I could begin to apply the base colours. The first of these was to the skin, and for this area I chose barbarian flesh. I thinned it down slightly with a little medium, but water would have sufficed too. The intention of this was to create a slightly thinner mixture that could be applied quickly over the model. As I was trying to trim down the painting time here, this helped a lot, as did focusing my application towards the upper parts of the model. For example, the top side of the forearm would, in real life, be lighter compared to the underside, so by focusing my paint across the top, I not only further reduced the area that I needed to paint, but also helped to add some realistic shadows to the model. This concept was something that I repeated across the miniature. Roman tunics are traditionally depicted in red, but there is also evidence that undyed wool was also used, creating an off-white appearance instead. And it's this appearance that I was looking to create next. By using some of the suitably off-white paint of Drake Tooth, I was able to recreate this effect. Again, I thinned my paint, and again I focused mainly on the upper parts, leaving the recessed areas alone. As I had used a brown primer, these areas then appeared to be areas of accumulated mud and grime. For the shield, I returned to the classic red colouring. For this, I chose to use some pure red due to its richness and intensity. As before, I thinned this mixture down and applied it in a few layers. The first covered the whole shield. I let this dry and then applied a second layer, focusing only on the top 2/3, and then once again just on the top third. The result is that of accumulated dirt has formed towards the bottom of the shield, which is exactly where you would expect it to appear. To paint the small plume on the helmet, instead of using a pure black here, I instead used the extremely dark grey of Necromancer Cloak. By using a dark grey at this stage, I was able to benefit from the effects of a wash, something that black wouldn't have allowed for. Next up were the metallic areas. The first of these were the steel parts, for which I used gunmetal. I didn't water this paint down quite as much, but I still followed the same principle of focusing on the raised and upper areas. The sword was fairly straightforward, but over the mail armour, I only applied a light amount of pressure. Due to the heavily textured nature of this area, the paint only formed on the raised links in the armour, leaving the recesses dark brown. This not only helped with the shading, but it also continued that weathered appearance. For the bronze part of the model, I used the aptly named Weapon Bronze. This was painted over the helmet as well as the banding on the scabbard and the shield. Once this task was completed, I cleaned out my brushes and changed my paint water to avoid any cross-contamination of metal flakes into my other paints. With all of the base coats completed, I next began work on adding the decals to the shield. Generally speaking, this is best done before any washes are applied, as the washes will help to blend the decals into the rest of the model. Now, before I cut anything, I first needed to prep the shield. I did this with some gloss varnish, as this would not only create a much smoother surface for the transfer to be applied to, but it would also help to protect the paint that had been applied so far. I applied a layer of this to each half of the shield before allowing it to dry fully. Now that the surface had been prepped, I could actually cut away the decal from the sheet and soaked it in some water until it was lifting away from the paper. I dampened the surface of the shield and gently prodded the two halves of the transfer into place. I used a brush to flatten them down and remove any excess water before leaving them to dry fully. A problem that a lot of people get with transfers is a ghosting or a silvering effect, which is basically a small halo that can often be seen around the edge of the decal, which can often ruin the effect. Starting with a gloss varnish does help with this, but it's not perfect, so I use some Microsol to help out. This is essentially a mild solvent that will soften up the decal, allowing it to better conform and sit flush against the surface that it's been applied to. Using an older brush, I applied a thin layer of this over the decal and allowed it to dry. I could still see a seam here, so I then applied a second layer, which did the job and removed that edge from view. However, it wasn't quite done yet. It needed to be sealed so the decal wouldn't be knocked around or it wouldn't be damaged by the wash. I chose to use some anti-shine matte varnish for this, as it would allow me to remove that glossy surface created by the first application of gloss varnish. Like before, I left this to dry before moving on. With all the base coats and decals in place, I could begin to add a wash. Washes are excellent for speeding up your painting process, as they will massively improve the detail in your model without you having to carefully build up layer after layer. They work by flowing into recesses and then darkening them down. This gives them the appearance of being shadowed and creates a greater degree of contrast between the high and low points of your details. I use the dark brown of Strong Tone for this. Its colour worked really well for all of the base colours that I applied, plus it also helped with that dirty, weathered look. I mixed just a little medium into this and applied the wash over the whole model, making sure that too much didn't pool into one place. At this point in the painting process, I could have just added some basing materials, attached the shield and called the miniature done, but if you have a little extra time and wanted to boost those details a little, you can do so with highlights. The first highlight I used was Elven Flesh. This lighter skin tone was carefully applied over some of the skin details. I didn't cover the entirety of these areas, instead just added a small amount to those prominent details like the knuckles, elbows and some of the facial features. Like with the wash, this step simply boosts that level of contrast between the raised and recessed areas, boosting the appearance of the detail. Next, I used some Monster Brown. This was used to pick out some of the details that I simply didn't paint and kept as a base coat of leather brown. These included things like the sandals, belts and trim of the male armour. Finally, I picked out the very edges of some of the folds in the tunic. For this, I used the slightly less off-white colour of Brain Matter Beige. And with that, the model was very nearly complete. I just need to attach the shield, varnish and then base the model, which left me with this. And here we have the completed Caesarean Roman painted to a reasonable tabletop standard. While the result certainly won't win any awards, it's a quick but effective way of painting that can allow you to get your forces painted up and onto the tabletop. You can find a full list of the paints I used to paint this, as well as a link to the Warlord Games web store where you can pick them up alongside the kit that this model was taken from. If you enjoyed this return to historical painting guides, then please do let me know, and make sure you subscribe to be kept up to date with all of my latest videos. And so the final thing to say is a massive thank you to my supporters. Currently my top supporters on Patreon are Stuart Smith, Jeremy Kaup, Jake and Daniel Dowling. So a big thank you to you guys, and if you also support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee or you just use my affiliates links, then your help is what keeps this channel alive and is what allows me to build these different kinds of conversions for you. If you'd like to help me out, then you can check out my description for all the relevant links. And so until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.